Funds for Bookworm are provided in part by Lannan Foundation.
Where would we be without books? Where would we be without Gutenberg? Even the thought of it's so absurd. Where would we be without books? Where would we be without books? Where would we be? Where would we be without Gutenberg? It's a rhetorical question, sir, but where would we be without books?
From KCRW and KCRW.com, I'm Michael Silverblatt, and this is Bookworm. Today, I'm very pleased to have as my guest Joseph McElroy. He's one of my favorite writers. You'd hardly use a word as naive as favorite with a writer like Joseph McElroy, but I like to. I like to because these books move and excite and stimulate me in ways that most writers don't even begin to know how to move or locate feeling and emotional meeting places. This new book is called Night Soul. It concludes with a story that I think is so beautiful that you read it practically on tiptoe because you're in a room with a sleeping baby, the baby's father, hearing a sound, approaching the baby, and the mother sleeping. You read the story slowly because you don't want any of your own breaths to wake up these characters. That's how deep and intimate the writing goes, so that you're participating in a waking dream of what it's like to be with a family in the darkness of a room. And it's so moving. Joe, how did this come about?
I'm not sure how it came about. I think it came about partly from being a father and realizing that it isn't simply a matter of engendering, and it isn't simply a matter of protecting. It's a matter of knowing, and knowing the child and knowing the child before the child can talk doesn't mean you don't know the child, but knowing the child seems, in this story, and I guess in my mind, to be connected to all kinds of other knowing. And that's one reason why, at the beginning of the story, the father, who is the consciousness of the story, not necessarily me, but I think he's quite independently, he's called the man, imagines the infant, the baby, to be in some sense his equal.
I'm sorry, Joe, but you are the man.
Okay.
I
certainly felt that when I was writing it.
I know there's a borderline for you between writing an autobiography, but you are the man.
Okay, all right. No, I certainly feel it when I read the story out loud. And when I knew what I wanted in the story, that it would be a story of 3 nights and a curious listening that the father does, and hearing. Listening and hearing are not quite the same thing. And the sounds that come from the baby and what the father makes of those sounds, that I knew. But I think I didn't know how to express the combined closeness and clarity that the character has for the child. And so I began really writing it in the first person, and I soon realized that that's not the way to do it at all. But I had to be careful about the third person. Did I want to name the character? No, I didn't. Was it because I wanted him to be universal? I think you never want something to be or someone to be universal in a story. You hope that maybe that happens, but you begin with the specific and hope that maybe it has a wider meaning. And so he is the man. That's all. He's the man, and I'm willing to be that man.
Now, facing me is a man that I've been reading for a good 40 years. And I think that some of the stories in this collection, which are gathered from over a lifetime, are some of his best things. Some of them are new, and this is the very first time he's published a book of short stories.
I've often thought that I had only a struggling flirtation with a short story. I guess because the complexity of some of the ideas and the length of the sentences and the ambition of many of the novels has led to long books. And even a book as short as The Letter Left to Me has a density which might seem long, not painfully so, but it might seem long and large. But all this time, I have admired the short story, and I could name some writers whom I've admired, and the names wouldn't surprise anybody. But I felt that I wasn't very good at that, because perhaps, like Henry James, notions of drama that seemed natural to the short story soon expanded into larger concepts, larger actions. And meanwhile, I wrote maybe 25 or 30 stories over this last 40-year period. And there came a time 2.5 years ago when I thought, well, why not now? Why not see what they look like together? And so I picked 14 or 15 of them, and we got that down to 12, and that's this book.
Well, you were lucky enough to have your second child when you were 58 years old, my age now. And I think that no one any younger could have written the story Night Soul. And so I thought I'd begin by asking you to read the opening sections of it.
I will. It may be ego, but, I'm sure it's ego, but I get very moved reading it. This is a television age, but I'm glad to be reading it on the radio. The first night, the man woke to a string of sounds, expelled, quite awful stabs of voice, throat-rasped, deliberate, from the crib across the room, so that for a time he felt the person there to be his equal, and he feared for him. In trouble over there, in a small, accurate way, the infant is possessed and on his own, and maybe the man can't help his son. Maybe he can't do anything about it. It is even part of him out of control. A shallow, sleeping family man who will wake in the middle of the night anyway. He woke to the woman breathing next to him, and to the room in the desert, his eyes opening on the window at the foot of the bed, where the screen was ripped, burst, jagged as a wave with an infinitesimal fire, like steel or flesh, telling him something has gotten in here, an animal, a hand. While the terrible sounds from the crib across the room, ah, eh, ah, eh, choked out, cut off, not asking for anything, were vowels, he realized. As if this is what you do waking alone. You speak, even if you are not talking yet. For anyhow the room is awake. So that getting out of bed beside the breathing of his wife, he would make a noise the baby would hear, who would want his company, or hers. But these vowels uncannily at work. The child is choking, or being taken away, or accosting, whatever it is. So what's his father doing here in bed? What is he waiting for? Like a comrade, he made his way across the cool bricks. He's with his son in a moment, flowed there to him, and stands above the crib, in whose immaterial depths a blink of the mouth locates the face. Where are his eyes? Darkened, do they stare behind their lids? They're asleep in some way, and distinct from the child that is his, whose mouth moves as the moon in the window above the crib draws a cloud in front of it. The kid's in one piece, thank God. Thank the stars, thank the desert. But the sounds begin again, for they were no dream of the man's zigzagging away through low pinyon pines and stunted ancient-elbowed juniper, the way the phone seems to have rung as you wake upon the waste of future and past which dreams are. But where are these sounds coming from if his son was not greeting a predator or giving a name to an intruder? Why, they're just practical sounds the baby's actually practicing, which the father hears as if his own good depended on it, and will try to answer. And so it happens that he is learning these sounds, like letting them strike what hasn't yet quite woken up in him. The ah, the squeezed off the palate, hard or choking, cut off, not hoarse at all in the dark, but blunt, certain, and alone. The man's no clawed intruder, but the father here, a witness, ready for anything, to be his son's equal, who is alone and launching these sounds, one that goes far, just the intent of it, while the next, you could swear, sends its breath at some near thing. Hearing is like answering him, even if they are no match for each other. He is to be answered. The man believes in it in the middle of the night. It's what he will tell him one day. Answer. Not do what they say, but don't not answer. If tongue-tied, at least make a noise. Go ah, go aye. Come back at them in a whisper, but don't not answer. Did the man just learn this? It feels so fresh. Seed planted in him in the middle of the night.
Joseph McElroy reading the opening of the title story in his new collection, Night Soul. I'm so taken by this story, Joe, because, I've read all of your books, and I feel like I've been reading you before anyone attempted to define you. And I read you to find out what you are, and I think this is what you are. The man trying to render an experience that has no words, in words so slow and carefully chosen that we move across the room with them. What the man is hearing is his baby. The baby doesn't even talk yet. These are the baby's first rapid experiments in sound with breath. And the man thinks, well, she over there, she can feed him from her body. But what if I could understand baby talk?
Oh, sure, yeah. The male and the female, for sure. And I think you make me think of a lot of things, Michael. Someone asked me the other day, because I forget that I'm 80 and healthy and so fortunate. Someone said, how do you go on being productive? And you can make joke-type answers to that and talk about health and talk about all kinds of things. And all of those are true. They're partially true. But I think one reason for the health and for the productivity and so forth, despite the age, has to do with this story. And it's the story was written in the 90s. I think it's that everyone, whether a kind of literal autobiographical fiction writer or not, and I am not, I think, feels that as the years go on, you're trying to get your story right, or you're trying to tell your story, and each new attempt is different. I think James Joyce felt that the different books that he wrote were all attempts to do that at later and more sophisticated stages, no doubt. But I feel that about these short stories.
I think, Joe, that you bring me back to what I love about seriousness in writing. I know that people compare you to Pynchon and all sorts of hard writers, but I compare you to Joyce. You're bringing, how does prose render everything in the world? The sound of a clock, the sound of a cat, the appearance of a billboard, everything to be caught and rendered, and if we're lucky, it's not formless, it's placed in a web. Is that actual? Is that accidental design?
I think it is. And insofar as I have intentions that I could even articulate, apart from their embodiment in the work itself, I think I always feel that there's a tension between some reality that's beyond language and here the language that I use. And if this is a story partly, some people may find it comic, I don't know, about sounds that the baby makes, and the father interprets them and turns them into a language, and then later in the story it turns out that the baby is making different sounds. And what does that mean? And the sounds are not even syllables, but they're like syllables. That is, they're like language broken up.
They're combinants.
Indeed, yeah. So is the story about language? Not really. The
No,
way that
your
question,
things aren't. It's a much later writing, it seems to me, in America. Right. Maybe when Nabokov says, "Oh, my Lolita, I have only words to play with." Right. But this is not a writer who can only play with language. No. It's language at the service of finding all those things that happen all day long that have no words.
Indeed. And here it's language as sound. And what do you make of the sound? And it's, I think, I'm proud of the story. I think it works in a number of ways. It's a very plain kind of story. You hear the sound of the infant, and of course you're proprietary and protective, and you've just woken up, and there's the threatening precincts of the dream nearby, and so you get up and you go to the crib, and who knows all the different things that you're feeling. But the parts of speech, or the sounds of the baby's pre-speech, are put together in all kinds of ways and fly apart at the same time. And so the story is only about language in the sense that it's about life and about the sounds of life that we try to make sense of.
I'm Michael Silverblatt, and you're listening to Bookworm from the studios of KCRW. I'm talking with Joseph McElroy, author most recently of Night Soul and Other Stories, published by Dalkey Archive. We'll continue after this short break. I'm Michael Silverblatt. This is Bookworm, and I'm talking with Joseph McElroy about Night Soul and Other Stories. It's a collection of his stories from across his career, but some of them are so beautiful, and one of them, I think, is one of the 4 or 5 most beautiful stories ever written, and that's why I'm singling it out. He has, too. It's the title story, Night Soul. There we are in a first paragraph that contains stabs, rasped, jagged, possessed, feared, out of control. I mean, we're beginning the way we wake up, which is in a state of panic if we wake suddenly. And so...
And the parts of experience, when they can sometimes seem separated and flying apart or staying apart from each other, can seem startling in themselves, even though this is also a moment in the middle of the night, a domestic scene, kind of ordinary domestic scene, when a guy's getting up to go to the crib. The moments when they're singled out can seem startling and shocking. And I think that's what close attention to anything can produce.
And I love that phrase. It's so shocking. Something has gotten in here. An animal. A hand. Well, there we're back in dream. A hand is floating around the room. Yes, of course, it would be a hand coming through the screen.
Quite.
Reaching. But in a dream, it would be surrealist.
So the dream is there, and the dream is always there. And if I speak of sources, which I don't like to do because I think I'm probably lying if I am, but one of the sources is certainly dream work. It was also important, since this story is a realistic story, a plausible story. It's about what could happen, and I think what even does happen, but at least what does happen in this story. It was important to me, before the story concludes, that we have explained for us why there is that gash in the screen. Because I don't want it to be just some fantasy out of the guy's dream, which is important enough and probably more important. But how the screen got that way, I owe it to the reader for the reader to know how the screen got that way.
Well, you see, in a Joe McElroy work, one's feeling is that eventually, across the adventure of reading, almost every word will account for itself. I think that's one of the things that Joyce introduced, that recurrence of a word 400 pages later, and now, it
of course,
clicks into
Pynchon does
place.
that too.
Not naturalistically.
No, not in the same way. Not in the same way. And as well, it isn't only that the word will recur, because Joyce has a sense of the whole of the work of art, but that on almost any page, which is why Ulysses is a lot easier to read now. It's been in the culture for a long, long time. It's just somehow easier to read, even for kids who pick it up and who haven't had the kind of reading training that you've had or I've had. There is a concreteness, a palpable concreteness in almost every word that Joyce uses. That's one thing that's so important, more important than the Homeric parallels, more important than the enormous complexity of the way that things relate to things. There's also a huge physical palpableness in the words. They're there, and they're ours.
So are your books here to teach us to read them in the future, like Ulysses?
It may be. It may be. I would feel presumptuous to say that. I've been told often, apropos of a book like Lookout Cartridge, and certainly Women and Men, my longest novel, that these are books that will be better understood later. I'm not too happy about that, because it seems to me that suggests that there's a propheticness that isn't the propheticness that I'm interested in. I think the propheticness that I'm interested in is the future of the next moment. You look closely at the page, you look closely at these words, and if you look closely enough and feel them enough, why, you are carried into something fresh and new, which is like a future. It's like the future of every moment following every other moment.
The narrator of this story is saying to the reader and to the father, be aware of everything that you are thinking, feeling, smelling, hearing. The wife says when she wakes up, I think you were thinking out loud. And he says, I wish I could think out loud. And he laughs at the idea of being able to.
Yeah.
But the story is thinking out loud.
And the story is thinking out loud with the body. You mentioned breathing. They're all breathing in one way or another. And in fact, sometimes, I don't even know whether this is in the story, one looks at a child in a crib, a tiny infant, and thinks, is he breathing? But breathing is important in lots of ways in my books, and it's important here. It's life, and you hear it or you don't hear it. It also has to do with speaking. It also has to do with taking a breath between speeches, and it's
also as if the story is like the coach of consciousness. Hey, be here, tiptoe now, don't wake her up, step across them. And you have these breather coaches in the famous novel, the 1,200-page one, Women and Men, who are telling you how to move across the terrain.
I think any work of fiction should implicitly, not explicitly, but implicitly help the reader, show the reader how to read, but how to read this particular piece. I'm not instructing the reader how to read a whole lot of other things, but I think I owe it to the reader to, partly through this tiptoeing that you speak of and the quiet of it all, how to read, how to attend. So how to read this story is maybe like how to attend to the other person, to the way I'm attending to you, or the way I attend to something I see out in the countryside.
For the entirety of your career, critics have been saying, this is like discovering Chartres Cathedral underwater, or, to ignore this would be like ignoring the recognitions, and they've always made it seem like these would be the hardest books in the world. How do you feel about those accusations of difficulty? You're certainly not an easy writer, but what do you make of that difficulty, especially now where if a listener hears difficult novel, they'll run a block away? How do you deal with it?
Honestly, I try to just shrug it off. If I try to give a highly intelligent answer, I can say, well, difficult isn't really a value judgment at all. Difficult against what? Against what kind of easiness? But I don't want to even say that. I feel that life is difficult. I feel that rendering the complexity of life may mean writing a prose that takes time to read. But taking time only means taking care, being careful, the way one is careful about people, about knowing people, about remembering what happened and being a good witness. And so if that D word comes out sometimes, it doesn't really bother me. I think that the sentences I write are trying to be honest and beautiful and close to the life which I live, which I'm grateful for.
I've been talking with Joseph McElroy, author, most recently, of Night Soul and Other Stories, published by Dalkey Archive Press. Thank you, Joe, for joining me.
Thank you, Mike. You always inspire me, and I feel not ever, because I don't ever feel like making sequels to what I've done, but I feel that it's worth going on trying to keep telling the story of my life or whatever it is, and I can go on doing that.
Thank you. You can comment on today's show or read an excerpt from Night Soul and Other Stories at kcrw.com/bookworm. You can podcast this program, share it with a friend, or embed it on your blog with the click of a button on our new media player at kcrw.com. My co-producer is Melinda Siegel. Alan Howard is associate producer. The technical director is Mario Diaz. Special thanks to recording engineer Patrick Murray at NPR West. I'm Michael Silverblatt. Join me again next time on Bookworm.